Welcome to the North Carolina Botanical Garden and this really exciting event to kick off our Saving Our Savannas Stories of the Longleaf Pine program series. That's going to go for 6 months from today. I'm Joanna Massey-Lalikas. I'm the Director of Learning and Community Engagement here at the Garden, and it's a pleasure to have you all here visiting with us. I can't tell you how excited I am to kick off this series on Saving Our Savannas. It's been an amazing 6 months of planning with amazing partners involved with this project. And to start with, I wanted to recognize our Saving Our Savannas sponsors for this program. At the advocate sponsor level, the Nature Conservancy. At the promoter sponsor level, the American Indian Center and Southern Conservation Partners. And at the community sponsor level, Jackie and Rob Trickle. And we thank them so much. They are allowing us to put this great program together by supporting our program planning, accessibility reach, and allowing us to keep the cost down for programs so we can have these programs be as accessible as possible. So I want to take a moment to recognize the Dream Team Steering Committee that we had work with us on this program. You saw in a previous slide the names of the organizations that are involved with this team, and we had individuals from each of those organizations, including the Botanical Garden, to support in terms of leadership and helping us network and connect with all of the presenters and speakers, workshop leaders, community experts that you'll hear from over the next 6 months. So many thanks go out to our partners, the Longleaf Alliance, Sarah Crate, who is in the room today. Feel free to raise your hand and wave to folks as you're here. We have the North Carolina Museum of Natural Sciences, Jerry Reynolds, the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Natural Resources, Kevin Melvin, Southern Conservation Partners, Venus Flytrap Champions Program, Julie Moore, the Nature Conservancy, North Carolina, Debbie Crane, Triangle Native American Society, Jesselyn Keziah, the North Carolina Museum of History, Earl Iams, and the American Indian Center here at UNC, Marissa Carmi. Here from the North Carolina Botanical Garden, Dr. Alan Weekly, Chris LaLoya, Mike Kuntz, and many more folks involved. And most especially, I want to share gratitude with 2 people who are really on the ground daily, making sure all of this comes together, and that's David Michaud and Emily Oglesby. So thank you all so much for your contributions. So today we really celebrate all the hard work of the steering committee and all the contributions, and what can we look forward to over the next 6 months? Lectures, workshops, demonstrations, fire schools, art exhibits, including a community art exhibit that you all can participate in. Youth-focused programs and an educational exhibit will be coming in June that will have a traveling component that will help keep this theme moving forward into years to come. So we have 2 well-deserved introductions, and it's my honor and privilege to introduce Mr. Earl Iams, one of our steering committee members, who will introduce our guest speaker today. Earl is a curator at the North Carolina Museum of History, where he has worked since 2008. He has also worked as a reference archivist and photograph archivist at the North Carolina Office of Archives and History. In addition to his work in history, Earl is also a 7th-generation farmer, currently farming in Johnston County, North Carolina. He graduated from North Carolina State University with a degree in history and minors in economics, English, and African American studies. Earl has been involved in so many things, so many that I can't share them all here with you today. So I've chosen a few. With historical projects, including serving as a subject matter expert consultant for the film Looking for Lincoln, as a host panelist for the African American Genealogy and History Forum, National Genealogical Society Conference, Earl has also been involved in a number of other projects, including serving as the Freedom Celebration in Tarboro and Chapel Hill. Serving as the narrator for the 2022 North Carolina Symphony Juneteenth celebration, as well as the Freedom Celebration in Tarboro and Chapel Hill. And he served as the Annie Casey Foundation lecturer in Atlanta, Georgia, and as a consultant subject matter expert for the BBC film production of Bleeding Pines of Turpentine in Southern Pines, North Carolina. He was a recent Emmy Award winner for preserving the Longleaf Pines film. It was developed with Spectrum News, and he's been involved with a number of other events, including the recent Black Farmers Conference at the White House and U.S. Senate late in 2023, and has created a video on historically Black colleges and universities. It has been an honor to work with Earl on this steering committee for Saving Our Savannas, and you'll have opportunity to hear from him directly in some of the programs coming up over the next 6 months, so please watch for those. Earl, thank you for everything. I'd like to hand this off to you.
Thank you, Joanna. And thank our steering committee and all the folks involved. I'm so glad, David, that you took the basketball off the screen. As a North Carolina State guy, I was gonna brag about being a Wolfpacker, telling Tar Heels about Tar Heels, but I digress. Nothing could be finer than to be in Carolina. All right, so it is my thrill and honor to be here with you. Happy Thursday. Happy Thursday, everyone. Oh, come on, happy Longleaf Thursday. Yes, thank you very much. This has been an honor and a privilege to serve on this committee and help develop this concept. And I'll say I'm just bubbling over like an Eastern North Carolina taco mouth being in front of you. And taco, that's one word. You gotta laugh at my jokes. All right. At any rate, I'm gonna have the distinct honor and pleasure and privilege to introduce our opening plenary, a good friend and colleague who had an opportunity to work with, particularly through the Longleaf Alliance. And so we have been, as he says, scheming on ways to collaborate between states, because as we know, Longleaf Pines know no state boundaries per se. And so in putting together the introductory remarks, Dr. Bill Owen sent a very impressive resume, and I was set to read it, and then he sent me an email last night, says, hey, don't do all that. We'll just kind of skip the highlights and mention particularly the Longleaf involved projects, because Dr. Bill Owen is a musician by trade. He graduated from Bowdoin College with highest honors in music and attended the University of Music and Performing Arts in Vienna as a Fulbright scholar, receiving his master's degree in organ and choral conducting from Yale University. He served as organist, choir master of Christ Church, Christiana 100 in Wilmington, Delaware for 33 years. He currently resides in Sussex County, Virginia on his farm, Raccoon Lands. I would highly encourage you for an opportunity to go see it. It's the northernmost range of Longleaf Pines, and Bill has done a marvelous job in helping to restore that native habitat. Bill's interest in Longleaf Pine began when he inherited the family farm and was introduced to this exciting ecosystem by another good friend and colleague, Brian Van Eerden from the Nature Conservancy of Virginia. And he has since planted more than 1,400 acres of longleaf on his property in Sussex County, Virginia, Raccoon Lands. Raccoon Creek Pinelands, I'm sorry. TNC holds an easement on this land, which is now a preserve dedicated to Longleaf Pine and ecology. Bill is honored to represent the northern range of Longleaf Pine of the Longleaf Alliance. He is currently vice chairman of that board, the Longleaf Alliance, as well as serving on the Virginia chapter of the Nature Conservancy and Partners Landscapes. And I could go on, but I thought it would be interesting if I just read part of the email that he sent last night. He says, "Thanks, Earl. It's a great honor, especially for a Virginian, to be speaking about Longleaf and North Carolina. All of my Virginia friends are shocked. So without further ado, it's my honor and privilege to introduce to you Dr. Bill Owen."
Thank you, Earl, for that kind introduction. And thank you to David and Joanna and the steering committee for inviting me to be with you today. It is a great pleasure to be the first speaker in this wonderful 6-month series here at the North Carolina Botanical Gardens about restoring and saving our pine savannas. As Earl said, it's quite daunting for a Virginian to be speaking in the Tar Heel state about longleaf pine. It is not only your state tree, but it's a critical lyric in your state toast. Here's to the land of the longleaf pine. However, since longleaf was, for all practical purposes, totally lost in Virginia, perhaps our efforts at restoration are even more critical in Virginia than North Carolina. So hence, I can justify speaking here today about my work in helping to restore this nearly lost resource. It is a mystery to me why my interest and passion in life shifted from being a performing musician to conservation and restoration of a nearly extinct tree in Virginia. It's an unusual story, and I don't completely understand it myself. When one thinks of the typical forest landowner in Southside Virginia, one thinks of pickup trucks with gun racks, hunting, fishing, probably agriculture. All of these things come to mind, and I have little or no interest in those things. And people all the time ask me why I want to own and manage forest land. I grew up in the village of Yale, Virginia, which is about 60 miles south of Richmond and about 30 miles from the North Carolina border. Quite frankly, as a child, I hated it. I wanted bright lights and concrete, museums, concerts. I yearned for all of the things that urban life could afford a young budding musician. Nothing was more boring to me than the thought of watching a tree grow, or worse, fretting about the weather and its effect on agriculture, which of course had a direct effect on our lifestyle. When I was given the opportunity of going away to boarding school for my high school years, I didn't want to even consider a school that was in a rural setting. I opted for St. Christopher's in Richmond, which at that time offered boarding possibilities. I began my studies of the organ there and decided to pursue a career in music, which of course was my passion. This led to Maine and Bowdoin College, Harvard, the Vienna Academy of Music, and then back to that other Yale, the University in Connecticut, for graduate school. Following Yale, I worked for 3 years as a research assistant to the American composer Aaron Copland. And at the top of that slide, you can see Aaron and me and my parents after a concert. I continued to work towards a career as a performer, both as an organist and a conductor. And in 1983, I accepted the post of organist crymaster at historic Christ Church Christiana 100 in Wilmington, Delaware, and taught organ at 2 universities there. Through all of these years, my family land in Virginia was far from my thoughts and interests. It wasn't until the death of my parents and the subsequent ownership of the property that I was rather forced into dealing with it. During my Connecticut days, I had learned about the Nature Conservancy, having played some benefit concerts for them with several colleagues at Yale. I respected the organization since it is science-based and the largest conservation organization in the world. Consequently, the very first thing I did when I inherited the family land was to telephone the Conservancy in Virginia. As luck would have it, an enthusiastic young biologist named Brian Van Eerden answered the telephone. By the way, Brian was an intern here at the Gardens in 1991 and credits his time there as the start of his conservation career. That's Brian on the far right. I explained my situation to Brian and told him of my instinct to sell the property and invest the returns in the stock market. Brian suggested that we meet and actually came to Yale, Virginia the very next day. We drove around the property and Brian kept getting out of the truck at various spots and kicking the soil and sifting it through his fingers. He suggested that this very sandy soil on my land was ideal for longleaf pine. I said, "What's that?" Brian is a phenomenal and enthusiastic teacher, and after several hours, I was actually interested. The more I read about and studied at this time in Virginia, this elusive tree, the more intrigued I became. Brian and I planted our first longleaf on an old logging deck back in 2002. And when those trees thrived, I was hooked. Rather than selling my land, I actually began buying more adjoining properties in order to increase the footprint of this wonderful tree and ecosystem in Virginia, and to play a small role in restoring this tree, which had played such a vital role in the settlement of our country. Now that's enough about me. Let's move on to something interesting, the longleaf pine, especially here in its northern range in North Carolina and southern Virginia. Before we explore longleaf pine and its ecosystem, it is important to recognize the four types of natural forests we are blessed to have in the southeastern coastal plain and spilling into North Carolina. In the top left photograph, you can see the estuarine forests, which are found around the tidal waters in the area around Virginia Beach and the Currituck Sound. The next forest type to the right is the largest contiguous block of forest land we have, and it is the peatland forest at the Great Dismal Swamp surrounding Lake Drummond. And I will point out that Virginia and North Carolina do a fantastic job of collaboration in the work in this area. Earl and I have a scheme to have that duplicated in the longleaf range. The floodplain forests on the left of the bottom slide are found in the wetland areas around our freshwater rivers, like the Nottoway and Blackwater rivers, which join to form the Chowan River here in North Carolina. And finally, the bottom right, we have the southern pine savanna. And that's the forest type we're obviously concerning ourselves with today and with this series. It is this open forest with tall pines and a lush green ground cover and an open midstory. Perhaps this is more the type of forest that comes to mind when we think of a pine plantation. one that is not managed with fire. Notice the thick mid-story and how minimal sunlight is able to reach the forest floor. This stifles vegetative growth, which of course benefits numerous invertebrates. However, it is important to acknowledge that all forests are important. Financial benefits, obviously wildlife, water quality, the big emphasis today on carbon storage, recreation, and of course, helping abate floods. Now we come to the Longleaf Pine Forest, and we're immediately struck by the rich biodiversity of this forest system. This wonderful picture is a montage of United States postage stamps. Hence, you'll see those USA 34s scattered throughout. An amazing number of plant species are endemic to the Longleaf Pine system, roughly 920. Plants that are found here and nowhere else in the world. Plants you can find in a mature savanna range from orchids, pitcher plants, grasses, other wildflowers, as well as numerous invertebrates. Equally amazing is how this plant diversity is packed into such small spaces. Here in North Carolina, over 45 perennial plant species have been documented in a 1 square meter plot in the Green Swamp outside of Wilmington. No other system can match this fine scale species packing. The range of this forest is huge. It stretches from the James River in Virginia to the most of Florida and western to eastern Texas. It's over 1,100 miles from east to west. It's one of the most biologically diverse systems, and in fact, it is the core of one of only 36 acknowledged biodiversity hotspots in the world. Not many people are aware of that, and it's a staggering statistic, I think. And most people aren't aware that this southern pine system starts in southern Virginia. This was the forest that was the backdrop for the Jamestown settlement at the founding of our country. And prior to that, for thousands of years, was under the stewardship of Native Americans. Fire is the unifying aspect of these forest systems. This remarkable and beautiful system depends on fire. Historically, for millions of years, these lands burned every few years, primarily ignited from lightning strikes. And also we know that our Native American Indians used fire for hunting beginning roughly 4,000 years ago. This regular burning kept the mid-story of the forest low and under control, so light was able to reach the forest floor. Fire is responsible for this incredible cycle of life. You can see in the inset a lightning strike, then this frightening fire event, then Longleaf looking dead, and then in only a matter of 2 or 3 weeks, this lush ground cover reappears, creating necessary habitat for insects, quail, and numerous other animals. I love this slide. On the left, you see a longleaf pine in its grass stage. Then that tract is being burned. And then the photograph on the right, the first one is that same grass stage longleaf 2 weeks after the burn. And then the one on the far right is 5 weeks after the burn. You would swear it was dead, and it's not. In comparison with the horrific fires that have burned in the western United States over the past years, this is not the forest that fire destroyed. This is the forest that fire built. It has been said that taking fire out of the longleaf forest is like taking the rain out of the rainforest. Again, you can see on this fire range map that it covers the historic range of longleaf pine. No surprise. The tree depends on fire to germinate, as the seed must come in direct contact with bare mineral soil, which the fire exposes. These controlled burns help protect us from the devastating fires that destroy. Even my father, who was not at all familiar with controlled burns in forests, used to say that fire was the best fire insurance a forest landowner could have. Pre-settlement USA had over 95 million acres of longleaf pine. Sadly, today we have only about 4% of that number. In Virginia, we had about 1 million acres, and today we have fewer than 200 trees. And I said trees, not acres, of that original forest. Today, due to planting on public and private lands, Virginia now has about 10,000 acres of longleaf pine. And of course, this loss was due to land conversion to agriculture, overharvest, conversion to loblolly, and fire suppression. The good news for us in Virginia and across the entire ecosystem is that the forest is more than just the trees, as strange as that sounds. Many of the plants and the animals of the longleaf forest are resilient and can persist even without longleaf. We know this thanks to the amazing work of many botanists, zoologists, and ecologists. For more than the past 80 years, we've had some nationally recognized authorities on this declining forest system working, studying, and teaching in Virginia and North Carolina. Tens of thousands of acres have remnants of this forest system, and this has inspired longleaf restoration on much state and private lands in both states. You see here on the top left, the famous botanist Fernald from Harvard, who worked in both states about 80 years ago. And then a dear friend of mine, Lytton Musselman, who was head of the Blackwater Preserve and taught for years at Old Dominion University. His superstar student, Cecil Frost, of course, who has been here at Chapel Hill, and Mitchell Bird at William and Mary. He's an ornithologist, and he has done, in many ways, responsible for saving the red-cockaded woodpecker. And Chris Ludwig, and of course, Alan Weekly needs no introduction here. In Virginia, we have formed a local implementation team called the Virginia Longleaf Pine Cooperators Group. And here in North Carolina, you have 3 teams: the North Carolina Sand Hills Conservation Partnership, the Onslow Bight Conservation Forum, and the Cape Fear Arch Conservation Collaboration. We are a part of the range-wide group of local implementation teams promoting longleaf restoration. This is the largest forest restoration effort in North America. I'm going to repeat that sentence. This is the largest forest restoration effort in North America. My property in Virginia is the core of a Nature Conservancy priority area called Raccoon Creek Pinelands. It is the largest longleaf acreage on private land in Virginia, and I leapfrogged with our state's Department of Conservation and Recreation for the tag highest acreage of longleaf in Virginia. They will ultimately win because they have more land. Just a quick glance at this wonderful map the Nature Conservancy produced for me. It shows the years that we have planted longleaf on various tracts, and the yellow banners are the forest fire years. And these are just some shots of our restoration work and burns. And then we come to, why do we do this? Why do we restore longleaf pine? I don't like the order of these. I think the third one is the most important one, the ecological benefits. And then Earl would very quickly say the cultural, and I agree with him, is the second, and certainly recreational. And I put the economic benefits at the bottom of the heap, but I can understand why it's really important. What is the process of rebuilding this forest? And it is a daunting process. It's not a simple process at all. When you select the area that you want, the next really important thing is protecting the land, because no one is suggesting that we plant longleaf on a 15 or 20-year rotation. Then harvest, fire, and planting. It takes partners. Longleaf restoration, we might as well admit it, is very expensive. None of this work would be possible without fantastic partners who provide critical financial support, and in my case, as a musician, needed guidance and education. To anyone contemplating longleaf restoration, I encourage you to contact your federal and state agencies as well as NGOs. I had a party for some of the partners who worked closely with me, and this was some of them after that party. And yes, that's my dog in the picture. Personally, from the outset, the Nature Conservancy has been my guiding light. They own an easement over my property and will own it and continue to use it as a demonstration site upon my demise. The United States Fish and Wildlife Service provided my very first substantial financial grant. And they did this before all of the other agencies had jumped on the longleaf restoration bandwagon. So I will forever be indebted to the service for making or jump-starting this process. The USDA NRCS has funded much of the planting and burning and the ongoing maintenance. Virginia Department of Forestry and other state agencies have offered ongoing support, and you have to get creative. We've gotten support from the Longleaf Alliance, from Norfolk Southern, from the Arbor Day Foundation, and yes, the Dave Matthews Band. The typical method of longleaf restoration, you begin with a clear cut, and then you do some sort of herbicide spray. This picture looks like the helicopter is picking up that fuel truck, but it's actually refueling. You can also do it with backpack sprayers. You can do it with the forestry skidder, and we've done all three. And then, of course, the planting. Since Longleaf Raccoon Creek Pinelands is a demonstration site for longleaf restoration, we currently have 3 of the 4 accepted methods of restoration. In addition to this basic clear-cut method we just looked at, we have over 400 acres of underplanting where you heavily thin a 30-year-old loblolly stand down to a density of 35 square feet of canopy basal area per acre. So here's a thinning operation, and you can see in the bottom right what you end up with. Now, we went far heavier in the thinning than that photograph. And here is a photograph of we planted longleaf underneath the remaining loblolly canopy. This method has many benefits for wildlife and also, obviously, aesthetics. The basic nature of a forest is maintained while the transition to longleaf is underway, and it is a boom for quail. Dr. Joan Walker, formerly of the U.S. Forestry Service and Clemson University, and she is a UNC graduate, is an expert in this arena, and we were very fortunate to have her guidance for this demonstration project. She served as the consultant. I took this photograph about 2 weeks ago, and these longleaf that you see under the loblolly are about 4 years old. Another method of restoration we've undertaken is called the 40-year patch clear cut, which was developed by the NRCS. You see this business, it looks like a checkerboard, really. These are half acres that were clear cut and planted in longleaf. Every 10 years, another set of half acre areas are clear cut and planted in longleaf. At the end of the 40 years, one has a tract of multi-aged half acre sections which mimic nature. Yes, this is any forester's worst nightmare. All of these methods require fire. So regardless of which method you use, this is your next step. We're a demonstration site, and one of the many reasons I so deeply enjoy being a part of longleaf restoration movement is the knowledge sharing that happens at all levels. I've learned so much from others, and it is deeply satisfying to see my property being used as a demonstration site to inform and inspire others. What's next? Well, the big focus we're working on now is ground cover restoration. Lytton Musselman brought some students out, and they collected Virginia bluestem seeds, and the Virginia Department of Forestry is growing them in plugs, the way one plants longleaf, and we're putting them in an old 10-acre agriculture field. So ground cover restoration is really our next emphasis, and we had Carol Denhoff, who's a ground cover expert, come and consult and do a seminar, and she's coming back. We also like to look at the cultural and historical values of longleaf. The man in colonial dress there is Kurt Smith, who portrays Thomas Jefferson at Colonial Williamsburg. And he's visited, and we're using more and more of Kurt in looking at what the landscape was pre-settlement and early settlement. And then that character you see there is Bob, Burner Bob, who was developed by my friend Reese Thompson as a sort of answer to Smokey Bear. He's a bobwhite quail and shows the benefits of prescribed burning. And of course, the latest thing is beer. And we have a brewery that they come and collect needles and put the needles in with the hops and so forth. It has a kind of perfumey taste to it, is the way I would describe it. And I hope that some of my trees will live and thrive past the year 2550. This photograph is of me and my good friend Reese Thompson from Vidalia, Georgia. Reese was chairman of the board of the Longleaf Alliance and is a landowner that is a real champion in longleaf restoration. This tree is documented to be 475 years old, and it's in Pinehurst, North Carolina. One gets chills hugging this tree, knowing that it was in the grass stage in the year 1578, long before the Jamestown settlement of 1607. I have a crazy vision or fantasy of two old men standing beside one of my trees 450 years from now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Bill. This was fantastic. And I loved the friendly competition around restoring longleaf pine. Who can restore pine? So, among other things that you shared. So now let's open this up to questions from the audience. So if you're in the room here, if you could raise your hand and I'll come to you with a microphone, and then David can help us connect with our Zoom audience. So we'll start here in the room. I've got a question over here.
I'm sure you've thought of this and all the people you work with, but in a simple answer, can you give us an idea of how you're anticipating climate change for this project?
Well, that's a $1 million question. If you could answer it, you would be even wealthier than you probably already are. But I think we're going to see just movement northward. You know, we're very conscious and rightly conscious about planting trees that are the right species in the right geographical area. I mean, maybe we should be planting North Carolina trees in Virginia, and the Virginia trees should be planted in Maryland. I don't really like that thought much, but maybe that's where we're headed.
David, do we have any questions online yet? Okay, I'm gonna make my way there and I'll ask one more question and then I'll bring the microphone to you.
Oh, that was a wonderful talk. Thank you. One of the real challenges we've had in restoring longleaf pine systems has been getting the appropriate genetic variation within the populations. We've had cases where things have been brought in from far too far away, but you have a real challenge in Virginia where you don't have much left in the way of longleaf to get the original genotypes involved. And it's such a small set of trees anyway that you wouldn't have the genetic diversity you perhaps want. So I'm really very curious how you've gone about selecting trees to plant in this wonderful restoration area.
Well, that actually is a bright spot. Our Department of Forestry and volunteers go every year and collect seeds from our more or less 200 remaining trees. And we initially were sending those seeds down here to your North Carolina Department of Forestry, and they were kindly growing them for us and then sending them back to Virginia. We also now, thanks to some really great people in our Virginia Department of Forestry, we now have made the large investment of being able to grow containerized Virginia stock longleaf in Virginia. Also, when I first got started with this, there was no possibility of getting Virginia stock trees, or if you did, you could only get enough to plant 2 acres or something. And you know, I was planting in the hundreds of acres, and we got North Carolina stock trees. I think what's important, I mean, from an emotional standpoint, I love the idea of planting trees that are the children of these 200 remaining trees that we have in Virginia. But that's not always possible. As you know, longleaf doesn't produce seeds every year. So we have bountiful years and we have skimpy years. We're just coming out of 2 very bad years. I have a little over 200 acres of Virginia stock, and the rest of mine is North Carolina. I'm not convinced there's a huge difference between, and that's heresy, I know, but I don't know that the tree knows the state boundaries particularly. And I think as long as one sticks with northern range, I think you could plant Virginia stock trees in North Carolina and they would be perfectly happy. My property is actually closer to North Carolina than it is where the remaining Virginia trees are.
Thank you, Bill. We have a question from our Zoom audience.
Yeah, I've got 2 questions from Zoom. One is from the perspective of a land manager and one is from a non-land owner. So from the land manager, could you speak a bit about the permitting and permissions required for doing a controlled burn?
Yes, that depends on different localities. Our Department of Forestry tends to oversee most of that. And it's different from your wanting to burn dead leaves in your backyard. If you are a proper licensed fire operator, you can get permits for other times of the year. But it's important. We need to protect people, and fire, let's face it, it's smoke. You need qualified people doing it.
Thank you, Bill. And for those interested in the fire aspect, the whole month of February is going to have some focus on fire, as well as for landowners, focus on fire.
And for the average person who doesn't own land, what can we do to help restore the longleaf pine ecosystem?
Oh, what a wonderful question. I think becoming more and more interested and knowledgeable about the system, and then get out and visit. I think you'll find most longleaf owners are eager to host you and show you and teach you, and you never know. Somebody might buy a tract of land and start restoring longleaf on it. As it's a wonderful, for me, my first 15 years, it was very much a hobby. You know, it wasn't I retired in 2015, and serving on these boards and becoming a sort of longleaf, I don't want to say champion, but I do sort of beat the drum a lot. It's become rather a second career, but it really began as a hobby.
Thank you, Bill. We have a question over here.
So in prehistory, the natives used to drive a lot of bison through the Appalachians. And so there used to be, 5 or 6 million east of the Appalachians. Do you have enough territory? And has there been any push to restore a herd of bison in any of these plots that you're planning?
I'm going to plead ignorance there. I don't know.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other question? I see one all the way across the room and then next up here. And then we'll check back in with David for the Zoom audience. Thank you, Ben.
So, great to hear some good news. I'd be interested to hear about your oldest restoration tract, how old that is and what it looks like now.
Well, my oldest tract would be 2002, but I won't call it a tract. It was that logging deck that I described. The next oldest tract would be, and it's a strange situation. Hurricane Isabel came through and wiped out one 45-acre piece of loblolly, and it was the first more than a logging deck that I had planted. So we put about 15 acres of longleaf in there, and that was in 2004. And the rest of the tract we planted the same week in Loblolly. So we've got an interesting demonstration site where on the literally the same 45 acres, half of it is Longleaf, half of it is Loblolly. And we just finished thinning that area straight through. So it's kind of fun. You can walk through and compare the differences between the two trees without having to sort of remember what you saw one place from another. But the oldest substantial acreage is about 200 acres, and that was planted in 2005.
Okay, we have another question up here. I saw one over there, and please remember to raise your hand.
Follow up with that, how tall are those pines now? But my question is, have you done surveys of invertebrates and birds and what has changed over the years?
We have, and we have several bird groups who are working there. But the kind of, from a musician standpoint, what has really rebounded is quail population and the wild turkey population. I mean, it's unbelievable. When I was a kid, you could walk around and you heard Bob White calls all the time. And then that stopped. I mean, the woods were silent. And fire, open canopy, all of these things. And that's one of the reasons we're doing this work with bluestem, which is we don't up here have the wiregrass that they have in Georgia and the deeper south, but bluestem is our answer, and quail love it. So we do have people doing surveys, and I don't have that information at my fingertips, but Nature Conservancy's done a good bit. The quail, some of our state people have done surveys on that. So yes, it's had a huge effect. The height, wow. Looking at the differences on this 45-acre tract, the longleaf seems to have a bigger diameter and not as tall, and the loblolly, smaller diameter and greater height. Now, people in the Alliance tell me that's backwards from what it ought to be, but it's what we're seeing. And we've got an expert from Virginia Tech who is in 2 weeks going to be doing establishing a baseline for this track. So we'll have heights and canopy and diameter and all of that sort of thing. So in 2 weeks, I can answer that question better as a baseline.
So you said you were have worked with Carol Denoff about the understory and ground cover. So what have you done to restore that really diverse area of the forest?
Well, we've found quite a few rare and threatened species there. Big picture, what we're doing, as I said, is the work on bluestem. We're trying to get the, what the sort of big picture stuff. But we've got quite a few things that have just appeared. Brian Van Eerden calls them the ghosts that are in the ground, that suddenly they're getting sunlight and exposure, and these seeds have been in the ground for years. We've got a spurge, only one in Virginia. We've got, and forgive me, I don't have the Latin at the tip of my tongue, but it's called a rattlebox, little square parchment. I guess the Native American children use them as rattles, hence the name. But it's definitely going to be our next focus.
All right, we've got another couple of questions on Zoom. This is from a Steve Owen. I don't know if he's related. When do you plan to burn again on your property?
We'll be burning quite a bit. We've got almost 1,000 acres to be burned this spring.
And will those be demonstration burns? Will you open those up to anyone that wants to?
Well, we're very happy to have people come and witness burns. There are some restrictions that one has to follow. I mean, we don't want people that are going to be in the path of a fire. People can always see a good bit in my property particularly, there's a surface road that goes through the center of it. So, you know, you can park on the road and see quite a bit.
And this next question, I had to do some Googling to know what they were talking about. The question is, are you familiar with the Stoddard-Neal approach to longleaf management? And my Googling led me to the Forest History Society, where they just define it as, at its most basic, the Stoddard-Neal method strives to maintain a diverse understory through the use of frequent controlled fire and a sustained yield multi-age forest through conservative selection harvesting. Does that mimic your approach, or do you have a different approach to conservation?
Well, I would say yes and no. This patch clear cut business that NRCS is promoting now, that we have about 80 acres of, certainly would fall into that category. Yes, we want diversity.
Okay. One more question. All right, got one more?
Hey, do you have any ongoing issues with invasives, and if so, how do you deal with that?
Oh, it's a nightmare, yes. We have something called Lesbodisa serica, and unfortunately, and I don't know whether it happened in North Carolina or not, but our Department of Forestry was planting it in ditches. So it of course then spreads, and the stuff will get on a tire. So you can it will get on the bottom of your shoe or a boot, and it spreads terribly. And the stuff loves fire. So burning does not do the trick. Our Department of Conservation and Recreation virtually lost a tract of 12-year-old longleaf burning with this intense heat that serica puts out. I mean, the flames are as high as this ceiling. I mean, it's unbelievable what it does. I have a very, very generous grant from the NRCS, the Natural Resources Conservation Service, from the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and we've done backpack spraying. Is that fixing it? No. Is it keeping it under control? Yes. It's a 3-year thing, so fingers crossed. We're just 1 year into that. But as I said, it was just, we started spraying in the ditches, you know, and road banks, and it just sort of spreads from there.
Well, Bill, thank you so much for having us here, or for being here with us and sharing your stories of the longleaf pine on your property. And thanks for all you're doing to restore that in Virginia.
Well, it's an honor to have been here, and thank you for being patient with a person who's not a biologist and not a botanist and a musician. So it was great. Thank you.